I'm not going to change his mind. What I'm going to do to, hopefully, is show his mind to people who are interested in knowing what we're talking about, because he receives so much criticism here. You know, you have to balance it with something. You have to listen.
Well, I thought one of the most fascinating parts in the interviews was the understanding of his perspective of how, when Russia came out, when the Soviet Union collapses and the Gorbachev period and the Yeltsin period, that he felt that the predatory nature of the capitalism that first came into Russia was something that had to be opposed, and that in essence that he felt that he basically told the capitalists, look, you guys are out of control. You know, the pension systems, the conditions of the people have gotten too. They cannot be sustained this way. And so he attempted essentially to curb the most rapacious form of capitalism.
Absolutely true. That's why he's popular, because he did it. He not only put Russian economy back on its feet, he got income back to the people. He was, in a sense, a populist dictator at that point, because I wouldn't even say dictator, he was an authoritarian. But he got that economy going, and they're thankful. Now, things change. It's been 16 years off and on. He's been president 3 times, prime minister 1 time. But they like his resilience, and they feel, even Mr. Gorbachev, who was very critical of him early on, says that he's the man for now, because everyone in Russia understands the pressure the United States is bringing, and NATO is bringing on the borders of Russia.
In early February of 2014, as the Maidan crisis was getting more violent, there was a phone call that was intercepted. It was a call between the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt.
Questions of credibility are being raised after a private chat between 2 top U.S. diplomats was leaked online.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
So you had this remarkable phone call where you have these 2 senior officials of the U.S. government apparently talking about a coup, or how they were planning to restructure the government of Ukraine.
Fuck the EU.
No, exactly.
I'm not saying the whole U.S. government feels that way. There is division on this, but the neoconservative element wants very much to change the strategic dynamic in Eastern Europe. The neocons are very smart people, and they've been at this for a long time. They came in around the issue of propaganda. They studied how to create hot buttons for the American people. They had this experience when they were getting the American people to get excited about Central America back in the 1980s.
Sandinista regular army. The ground force is being equipped now with Russian artillery.
And they've been applying those same strategies ever since. They remain very dedicated to achieving their goals. They still want to get rid of certain governments. They wanted a regime change in Syria, for instance, regime change in Iran. They're very skilled at this, and they have a lot of allies now inside the news media, inside the government, and that means that they can do a lot to control the narrative of any story.
I think in America these days, we have somehow told ourselves that there are a lot of ways of dealing with these problems other than hard power. Vladimir Putin cares about hard power.
The neoconservatives can now demonize a leader of a country. That sells with the American people. So you don't just sort of argue a policy, you attack the leader. So the neoconservatives became very skilled at picking out leaders, finding their ugly traits, and then highlighting them. Yanukovych, you might say, was a rather clunky political leader, but you make him into a devil. He's totally corrupt, and he's evil, and he wants to kill people in the Maidan, these wonderful white-hatted demonstrators. So you've got a black hat versus white hat. And you keep repeating that basic scenario, and it works with the American people.
We've got to realize what Vladimir Putin is. He's an old KGB colonel that wants to restore the Russian Empire.
You make them into demons, and the American people find that the way they can understand the world. Once that happens, it's very difficult for journalists or anyone else to say, you know, hold it, that guy, he's got more of a gray hat than a white hat or a black hat. And if you say that, you suddenly you're a Yanukovych apologist or you're a Putin apologist, And then the attacks come on to the person saying it, the journalist, the academic, or whoever.
Hello and welcome to the third episode in this series on the current conflict in Ukraine. Here I'm gonna focus on Putin as the third culprit. As mentioned before, after all the research and reading that I did around this matter, I find three culprits that bear different levels of responsibility in this conflict. First and foremost is NATO and USA, then President Zelensky, and finally Putin, Russia or Putin. I got into this because this is such a major issue, and I'm very well aware that this could escalate into a bigger world large conflict. Even now, as I was getting ready to record this, there were about 6 fighter jets flying at high speed up above here in the UK. So it looks like the world is getting ready for something bigger, getting prepared, and I hope this will never get to that. A couple of weeks before this whole Ukraine crisis started, I've listened to a lecture by John Mearsheimer, which I referred to before, and that shed a lot of light on this situation and helped me see it from a wider, almost lifting above and looking at the situation as not a small thing happening between Ukraine and Russia. The lenses through which I looked was, what is the truth? Can I get to the bottom of it? What is happening here? And then, is it right? Where is the injustice here? Why is this thing happening? I've arrived to certain conclusions, and that, in my view, puts Russia with a minimum responsibility for the situation compared to Zelensky and compared to NATO. That being said, let's move on to talking about Putin. Talking about Putin is very much like talking about Donald Trump. Unless you have something bad to say about him, you are going to be automatically regarded as pro-Trump. So I'm very much aware of this. Now, you gotta understand, giving Putin a lesser role in this conflict, it's quite unusual because, if anything, I was just like a lot of people from that part of the world, people from the former Soviet Union that dealt with Russia and its influence, I was very much against it. And I was a lot like, I don't want to have to deal with this. I wish this problem didn't exist. I wish that this issue wasn't here. So for me to say this is quite a turn. Nevertheless, just like with Trump, there is not that there is everything bad about the person and there is nothing good to say. This is propaganda. You can be sure that they either have something unsolved with this person and can't let it go, that is one. And two, they have an interest in just slamming this person just because it's popular or like you're applauded and well received. And I tend not to trust those kind of sources that say, oh, bad. And you shouldn't trust them either. They have an agenda. My sources. How do I select my sources? Just because we have access to a lot of information, it doesn't make all this information valid in this day and age. And this is an issue that Snowden pointed out in an interview. He stated that nowadays everyone having the right to an opinion can come forth and put forward that opinion. But the problem is, do they have the proof for what they are saying? And this is what I'm following in this research that I'm presenting. I'm always looking at the sources, whether I can trust this source or not. In my view, there are 3 different types of sources. There are objective sources. Somebody sees something and they substantiate it with sufficient proof. An example of this would be Snowden. Is he a reliable source? Of course he is a reliable source. He's not gaining anything from it. If anything, he has lost his life, the kind of life that he used to know. Is McGovern a reliable source? Of course he's a reliable source. This man has returned a medal that he received at the end of his service as as a CIA analyst for especially commendable service. He returned it when he found out the CIA was heavily involved in torture. That's a big thing to do. So when he starts talking about these things, I trust him. When I hear, on the other hand, someone like Khodorkovsky, for example, a former oligarch from Russia, who somehow they didn't get along with Putin, and as a result, he got in jail, and he now speaks so much against Putin. I know his testimony is tainted. I know he's interested. I know he's upset and all that because it's a personal thing for him. So while I don't say that he's lying, I know that he has a motive, so I always take it with a grain of salt when I hear something like this. For me, this is a tainted source, a second type. Another type of source is the media, the mainstream media, which is a very politicized source, so that is also depending what channel are you listening. Also, because they always often use these kind of slogans and they don't go into analysis, just put it there as much of an attractive title as possible to get you pulled in to listen. I gotta tell you that before preparing for this, I've stayed away from any Russian sources on purpose, just so that I don't get pulled into, them and like say that, I got influenced by them. Nevertheless, to prepare this about Putin, I went purposefully and listened to him speaking, Mr. Lavrov, Maria Zakharova with the Ministry of Defense. Actually, it was for me to get a better understanding and also see their viewpoint of what is happening from their perspective. And one thing that became clear is that my findings and my views are very close to their views, which explains why some people put me in this category pro-Putin, except I didn't get it from listening to Russian outlets. Let me reiterate it again. I look at the situation from all possible angles to see where the truth is and where the injustice is. Why did Putin attack? I heard different views. Some say that it was because of the resources in Ukraine. Some talk about his dream of expanding Russia. Some even say him wanting to go back to the Soviet Union. And there is also this NATO threat that many outlets try to downplay it as if it's like not really a reason. What are my conclusions? The overarching reason is NATO. He pointed this out at one of the Munich Security Council in 2007.
I think it is obvious that NATO expansion does not have any relation with the modernization of the alliance itself or with the ensuring security in Europe. On the contrary, it represents a serious provocation that reduces the level of mutual trust. We have the right to ask, against whom is this expansion intended? And what happened to the assurances our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact? Where are those declarations today? No one even remembers them, but I will allow myself to remind this audience what was said. I would like to quote the speech of NATO General Secretary, Mr. Warner, in Brussels on the 17th of May 1990. He said at that time that the fact that we are ready not to place a NATO army outside of German territory gives the Soviet Union a firm security guarantee. Where are these guarantees? The stones and concrete blocks of the Berlin Wall have long been distributed as souvenirs. But we should not forget that the fall of the Berlin Wall was possible thanks to a historic change. One that was also made by our people, the people of Russia, a choice in favor of democracy, freedom, openness, and a sincere partnership with all the members of the big European family. And now they are trying to impose new dividing lines and walls on us. These walls may be virtual, but they are nevertheless dividing, ones that cut through our continent. And is it possible that we will once again require many years and decades, as well as several generations of politicians, to disassemble and dismantle these new walls?
I wish that NATO representatives would have taken it seriously. We might have not even have this. We might have not have this crisis. NATO expansion has been such a major thing for Russia. I want you to listen to a clip of what that means to Putin. Listen to his words, and by the way, try to assess also if this is a crazy person speaking.
Сегодня это внешнеполитический инструмент Соединенных Штатов. Там нет союзников, там есть только вассалы. Когда страна становится членом НАТО, ей уже очень трудно сопротивляться давлению со стороны такой крупной страны, лидера НАТО, как США. И там легко может появиться все, что угодно. И система противоракетной обороны, и новые базы, и, если потребуется, и новые ударные комплексы. А нам что делать?
And what are we supposed to do? In this case, we have to take countermeasures. We have to aim our missile systems at facilities that are threatening us. The situation becomes more tense. Why are we so acutely responding to the expansion of NATO? Well, as a matter of fact, we understand the value or lack thereof and the threat of this organization. But what we're concerned about is the following. We are concerned by the practice of how decisions are made. I know how decisions are taken there.
I have concluded the ABM Treaty hinders our government's ability to develop ways to protect our people from future terrorists or rogue state missile attacks. Today, I have given formal notice to Russia. The United States of America is withdrawing from this almost 30-year-old treaty.
Ведь этот договор был краеугольным камнем всей системы международной безопасности. Это вообще основа основ была международная безопасность. И меня уговаривал сначала поддержать выход Соединенных Штатов из этого договора президент Клинтон. Он, насколько мне известно, представитель демократической партии. Без всяких оснований, потому что есть угроза со стороны Ирана. Значит, потом это самое сделал президент Буш. Я должен сказать, что мы предложили работать над системой противоракетной обороны совместно. Соединенные Штаты, Россия и Европа. В конечном итоге, как это ни печально, наши партнеры от этого предложения отказались. Но для того, чтобы сохранить важнейший элемент международной стабильности, а именно сохранить баланс сил стратегически, мы тогда будем вынуждены развивать наши ударные ракетные системы, способные преодолевать любые системы противоракетной обороны. Ответ был простой. Эта система создается нами не против России, а вы делаете, чего вы хотите, потому что мы исходим из того, что это не против Америки. Ну, я сказал, хорошо, так и будем делать. Мы и так и делаем.
The system we are contemplating would not undermine Russia's deterrent or the principles of mutual deterrence and strategic stability.
The missile defense capabilities we are developing are not designed to defend against Russia. Just as the new NATO we are building is not designed to defend against Russia. The Cold War is over. Russia is not our enemy.
Okay, so no rules, new rules. American rules.
Для нас здесь две угрозы для России. Первое – это то, что размещение этих антипротиворакет в непосредственной близости от наших границ в восточноевропейских странах. И вторая угроза заключается в том, что пусковые установки этих антиракет в считанные минуты, за несколько часов, могут быть переоборудованы для постановки там ударных комплексов ракетных. Да, а теперь смотрите, значит, в Восточной Европе будут установлены комплексы, на воде, на море будут установлены на кораблях, которые будут дежурить в Средиземном море и в северных морях. И на Аляске стоят. То есть практически территория России будет окружена этими системами. На самом деле это еще одна грубая, большая стратегическая ошибка наших партнеров. Потому что на все эти действия Россия даст адекватный ответ. Это будет означать не что иное, как еще один виток в гонке вооружений. При этом наш ответ будет гораздо дешевле, она может быть где-то более грубая, но она будет эффективной. И мы сохраним вот этот так называемый стратегический баланс. Баланс – это очень важная вещь.
Oh, this is actually what Reagan and Gorbachev came so close to achieving in 1986. At one point, they wanted to go all the way, complete disarmament.
Вы же помните, как развивался атомный проект? Когда Соединенные Штаты создали атомную бомбу, и Советский Союз начал активно развивать эту же атомную программу, в России работали и отечественные ученые, иностранные ученые, прежде всего немцы. Но наша разведка получала огромное количество информации из Соединенных Штатов. И достаточно вспомнить супругов Розенберг, которые были отправлены на электрический стул. Не они добывали эту информацию, они только передавали ее. А кто ее передавал? Сами ученые, которые разрабатывали американскую ядерную бомбу, атомную бомбу. Почему они это делали? Они поняли опасность. Они выпустили джина из бутылки. Загнать его туда невозможно. И вот эта международная команда ученых, наверное, они были поумнее, чем политики. Они сознательно, я считаю, отдавали вот эту информацию Советскому Союзу, чтобы в мире восстановился баланс ядерный. А мы сейчас что делаем? Мы сейчас пытаемся этот баланс нарушить. Это большая ошибка.
So stop referring to them as partners, our partners. You've said that too much.
Потому что диалог должен быть продолжен.
You should wish me a happy 4th of July, being an American.
Да. Я вас поздравляю.
It's our Independence Day, so to speak.
Да-да-да.
Yes, I know.
Я в курсе.
I know that.
So, in a hot war, is the U.S. dominant? Yes or no?
Нет.
No. It would be a case of Russia surviving it.
Я думаю, что никто бы не пережил.
I think that no one would survive such a conflict.
Even with the missile shield.
На сегодняшний день ракетный щит не защитил бы территорию США. И мне кажется, что в этом есть определенная даже угроза. Угроза заключается в том, что может создаваться иллюзия защиты. И это может привести к более агрессивному поведению. Поэтому так важно не допустить односторонних действий. Вот именно поэтому мы предлагали совместно разрабатывать систему противоракетной обороны.
This was originally proposed, by John Kennedy with Nikita Khrushchev in 1963.
Знаете, все-таки, если вы сейчас вот к этому вернулись, все-таки хотел напомнить, с чего начался Карибский кризис. Я не поклонник Хрущева, но все-таки размещение на Кубе советских ракет было спровоцировано размещением американских ракет в Турции, с территории которой эти ракеты американские легко достигали территории Советского Союза. Хрущев ответил на это размещением ракет на Кубе. Он не был инициатором Карибского кризиса.
I know there was a crazy time. Stanley Kubrick, a filmmaker I much admire, made a wonderful film called Dr. Strangelove. How I Learned to Love the Bomb. Has he seen it?
Видели его?
Oh, you must see it. Really, it's well worth it. It's a classic. Because Mr. Kennedy was dealing with a military system that had been growing since World War II, and the generals at that point knew that the Soviet Union did not have the capacity to match them. many of them said, this is the time to hit the Soviet Union. So there was a desire for a unilateral strike against Russia. Kennedy said, you're crazy. And then as other situations developed in Berlin and Cuba, it became more dangerous. Well, the United States has become more right-wing since the Ronald Reagan era. And now we have Hillary Clinton on the left, supposed left. She's the Democratic challenger, probably will be, making very aggressive statements also against, about Ukraine and comparing Mr. Putin to Hitler.
Now, if this sounds familiar, it's what Hitler did back in the 30s. The ethnic Germans, the Germans by ancestry, who were in places like Czechoslovakia and Romania and other places, Hitler kept saying they're not being treated right. I must go and protect my people, and that's what's gotten everybody so nervous.
Ничего нового для нас в этом нет.
Nothing new to us.
Мы с ней знакомы лично. Она энергичная
женщина. We are personally acquainted. She's a very dynamic woman.
У нас тоже могли бы быть всякие сравнения, но мы в силу политической культуры воздерживаемся от крайних высказываний.
The United States has never really had a war on its own homeland.
Yeah.
And to many people, who are very important people, war is somewhat of a game. I fear that still in the United States. I fear the neoconservative element as being so hungry to make their point, to win their case, that it's dangerous.
Я тоже.
I fear them too.
They didn't take it seriously. Why is he concerned about it? Well, it's a military alliance. It's a nuclear alliance right to his borders. One. And two, USA is not friendly towards Putin. Can you see the combination between these two? Can you see why he should maybe be concerned?
I remember one of our last meetings with President Clinton in Moscow. During the meeting, I said we would consider an option, that Russia might join NATO. Clinton said, why not? But the U.S. delegation got very nervous.
NATO, and your summation of that.
13 countries have joined NATO since Clinton made this, I think, rash decision to expand it to the east. That was not the promise made by Baker and the senior Bush to Gorbachev. Gorbachev swears to this. It was not put on paper. This is one of the reasons that Putin is upset with Gorbachev as a practical man, as a politician. It should have been on paper, but it wasn't. So they see Gorbachev as acting out of weakness, and as a result, the whole Soviet Union collapsed very quickly. And 25 million people, roughly, were left outside the old borders and with new countries, without the protection of the Soviet Union. Their pensions and so forth not met. And then, of course, the internal system collapsed. So it was an ugly time, and the Second Chechen War broke out. You know, we talked about NATO, but NATO is a huge problem for them, not for us. And a lot of the people who are in NATO now are very anti-Russian, Eastern countries, and anything can happen. An accident like in Dr. Strangelove could happen very, very easily.
And we're going to get to his response to Dr. Strangelove in a minute.
Yeah.
He even says he'd like to join NATO.
Well, he was kind of joking, and he was, no, what was surprising about it was Clinton's quick response. Why not? You know, that's the way Clinton used to kind of act. And when the delegation heard that, their faces dropped. They didn't want Russia in NATO because NATO they'd have a veto. Mm-hmm. And he makes the point that none of these countries in NATO have ever said no to the United States positions. Never.
This has been done with NATO violating some of the promises that were given, that NATO would not put its arms or bases farther than the eastern Germany border, which was not a written agreement, nevertheless was a promise to Gorbachev at that time. And then there is the international law that talks about the foreign policy of any country, putting another country's security at risk, and how that is to be avoided. So these two principles, two moments, have been violated by NATO. However, nobody's keeping NATO accountable, and they could afford to do that.
It is sufficient to look at recent history. Did not our country have a peaceful transition to democracy? Indeed, we witnessed a peaceful transformation of the Soviet regime. A peaceful transformation. And what a regime. With what a number of weapons, including nuclear weapons. Why should we start bombing and shooting now at every available opportunity? Is it the case when without the threat of mutual destruction, we do not have enough political culture, respect for democratic values and for the law? I am convinced that the only mechanism that can make decisions about using military force as a last resort is the Charter of the United Nations. And in connection with this, either I did not understand what our colleague, the Italian Defense Minister, just said, or what he said was inexact. In any case, I understood that the use of force can only be legitimate when the decision is taken by NATO, the EU, or the UN. If he really does think so, then we have different points of view. Or I didn't hear correctly. The use of force can only be considered legitimate if the decision is sanctioned by the UN. And we do not need to substitute NATO or the EU for the UN. When the UN will truly unite the forces of the international community and can really react to events in various countries, when we will leave behind this disdain for international law, then the situation will be able to change. Otherwise, the situation will simply result in a dead end, and the number of serious mistakes will be multiplied.
Now you'd say, what does Ukraine have to do with it? As long as Ukraine had a pro-Russian president, people that were on good terms with Russia, there was maybe a hope and no urgency to the situation. So what happened to set Russia off in such a way? To understand that, we need to understand the events that happened in 2013 and 2014. I remember just hearing kind of in the news that Yanukovych was supposed to sign a treaty with the European Union, and he just walked away from it, or he didn't sign it. And we were all shocked. In the mind of ordinary people, at least I didn't understand what's happening. So I thought here was a chance for Ukraine to finally move towards Europe, and this man just didn't sign it. How crazy is that? And we knew that he's in good terms with Putin and Russia, and we thought, of course, he's just following Putin's orders. Look what has actually happened.
Mr. Yanukovych, I'm an American. I'm an outsider to this situation, and it's very complicated. But I would like, as a filmmaker, just to jump into the action and go to those moments in November 2013. You're president of the Ukraine. You've been president for 3 years at this point. The country is in bad economic shape, very bad. You have a trade agreement with Russia, and now you're seeking to make a better agreement with the EU, with the European Union, and you are negotiating. Can you bring me to that moment and what you're thinking?
Действительно, это был очень сложный период времени для Украины, и нам нужно было найти решение проблем в 2013 году. Поэтому у нас было два партнера. Прежде всего, мы рассчитывали на Международный валютный фонд. Но Международный валютный фонд на протяжении года, когда мы вели переговоры, нам предлагал неприемлемые для нас варианты решений. Значительное поднятие тарифов для населения, прежде всего на энергоносители и на газ, то есть значительный рост расходов населения, при том, что доходы оставались прежние. Мы на это не пошли. Мы предложили другие варианты решения вопросов. Мы получили официальный отказ Международного валютного фонда в ноябре 2013 года. Оставалась Россия. Россия нам сказала, что мы готовы с вами работать как партнеры, если вы учтете наши интересы.
Того, что экономика Украины и России зарождалась как единая экономика, сложились абсолютно уникальные, особые экономические отношения. Рынки в России были полностью открыты для украинских товаров, а при этом наши границы с Украиной таможенные полностью раскрыты. Таким образом, Евросоюз как бы заходил со всеми своими товарами на нашу территорию без всяких переговоров.
И когда мы начали считать балансы, мы увидели, что соглашение, которое подготовлено Европой для Украины, требует больших экономических расходов, компенсаций потерь, а Европа компенсации не предлагает. При том, что российский рынок при этом для Украины частично сокращался или прикрывался.
Сказали, конечно, если Украина решила так поступить, это ее выбор, и мы уважаем этот выбор. Но мы не должны этот выбор оплачивать.
Наши переговоры с Европой не увенчались успехом. Поэтому на этом пути мы предложили сделать паузу.
Both EU and Ukrainian officials said on Thursday the suspension of talks on closer ties could be revived after the two-day meeting. But officials said the deal was off the table for now.
Expected more.
Basically, this led to a big riot, which, if you watch that documentary, Ukraine on Fire, you will see that it was well prepared.
Violent clashes erupted in the Ukrainian capital Kiev as more than 100,000 people protested against a government decision to delay an association deal with the EU.
That led to the Maidan revolution, organized with resources and money from the West, from US government.
И говоря о протестах ноября-февраля, необходимо обязательно учитывать динамику их развития, которая происходила на Украине заранее до того. Огромное количество общественных организаций, которые финансировались из-за рубежа, огромное количество журналистов, работающих на гранты.
Robert Perry is a longtime investigative journalist based in Washington, D.C., best known for his major disclosures about the Iran-Contra scandal in the 1980s. He is the founder of Consortium News, where he has reported extensively on the crisis in Ukraine and the forces behind the unrest.
An NGO is a non-governmental organization. Now, many NGOs are quite legitimate. They represent good causes. Maybe they help people in a country feed or deal with water problems or deal with various kinds of social problems. But there are some NGOs that have become funded by government entities and serve more the purpose of that government rather than trying to serve the people that they are ostensibly working for. One thing we saw in the 1980s, at that point the Central Intelligence Agency had been largely discredited because of scandals that had been exposed in the 1970s.
For 15 years, the CIA has secretly financed overseas activities of the National Students Association. But then there came to light a fantastic web of CIA penetrations.
So when the Reagan administration came in, there was this concept that instead of having the CIA, which traditionally would go into these different target countries, funding their media, funding NGOs, funding different political operations, that was essentially farmed out to a new organization called the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created in 1983. And it would do pretty much what the agency used to do. It would go into one of these countries and it would support various political groups, train activists, deal with journalists, business groups, and try to advance U.S. foreign policy interests, sometimes against the interests of the host government, the target government. And beyond that, they received financial and other logistical help from the National Endowment for Democracy and other U.S. agencies that helped them training activists, working with journalists to get their side presented more favorably. They work on things like how do you get traction? How do you get things to go viral? How do you then use that to generate support for your cause?
And support was generated. Mustafa Nayyem, a founder of one of Ukraine's new media outlets, Hromadske TV, knew very well how to make something go viral It was his notorious Facebook post on November 21, 2013, that brought the first crowds to Maidan.
Я це написав просто, щоб почути, чи є ці люди, чи просто поговоримо десь у Фейсбуці.
If you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you read the newspaper, you are misinformed. As the disturbing events of Euromaidan started on November 21, 2013, 3 new TV channels went on the air and suddenly became stunningly popular in Ukraine. Spilno TV, November 21st. Hromadske TV, November 22nd. And Espresso TV, November 24th, directly from opposition protest. These channels went viral, supporting the protests and encouraging more and more people to come to Maidan.
Very violent, with the far-right neo-Nazi groups involved, killing people.
Сначала акции проходили мирно. На эти акции пришли люди разной категории. Это были молодые и пожилые люди. Приходили с детьми. Явно было понятно, что с их стороны есть доверие к власти. Значит, соответственно, на охрану общественного порядка выходили правоохранители без огнестрельного оружия. Но среди митингующих уже замечены нами радикалы, которые относились к правым партиям, неофашистским организациям. И 24 числа, 24 ноября, они осуществили первую агрессивную акцию. – 24 числа первое было нападение на кабинет министров и первое нападение на сотрудников правоохранителей, которые охраняли. Второе нападение на правоохранителей службы безопасности Украины произошло 25 числа. Затем небезызвестные события 30 числа.
November 30th of 2013 became the first turning point of Euromaidan, and one of its most reported and mysterious events.
События, которые проходили в тот период в Киеве, они были очень радикальные. В них принимали неонацистские организации, молодые люди, которые были различными вооружены различными средствами. Металлические прутья, биты. В том числе использовалась техника, например, дорожно-строительная, грейдерами, и они грейдерами наезжали на работников правоохранительных органов, на милицию, которая защищала и не давала захватить правительственные здания. Технологии, которые применялись в тот период времени, они были заранее спланированы.
As veiled and masked as the color revolutions can be, an attentive viewer can see subtle patterns and similarities revealing their true nature. To make crowds act as one obedient group, they have to be united at the unconscious level. The masterminds of color revolutions know this well and have perfected the art. Symbolism is one of the most powerful tools to achieve this end. Revolutionary political organizations with surprisingly similar names and even more similar logos have appeared time and again, almost as omens marking the countries that would be hit by the colored plague next. They are often described as being aware and active, when they're actually trained and radical. They are the ones who take the first shot, literal and metaphorical, to transform the peaceful protests into full-blown coups d'etats. Their fingerprints can be found everywhere on the map of the color revolutions. Using all the experience of past generations, simple but effective tools like catchy sing-alongs and chanting are employed. Well known for exciting the crowd and creating a group identity, they depersonalize individuals and make them easier to manipulate.
That led to Yanukovych fleeing the country. When Putin saw what was happening in the Maidan, he made the decision to annex Crimea by a referendum.
As the events in Kiev took their course, Crimean authorities issued a declaration, putting into words the fears of its people. Based on the will of the Crimeans who elected us, we declare that we will not give Crimea to extremists and neo-Nazis seeking to seize power in Ukraine at the cost of the blood of the country and its citizens.
The situation in Crimea is being presented as a Russian invasion. And again, nobody who looks at this seriously and looks at the poll numbers, some of the poll numbers done by the US government agencies themselves, showing that the people of Crimea preferred being part of Russia. In the US news media, it has all been presented as the Russians invaded, they then staged a sham election with people with guns at their backs. Somehow they faked the ballot boxes to get 96% approval for rejoining Russia. So that's how it's been sold to the American people. The reality is very different.
The atmosphere here certainly is electric. Thousands of people who've gathered in the capital Crimean city of Simferopol. All of this following a referendum held last Sunday in which the majority of people here overwhelmingly voted in support of being reunited with Russia.
And a temporary president being appointed, they immediately passed the law to repeal the minority language laws, and that was met with protests on the Russian-speaking population, which is a large percentage of Ukrainians.
In early spring of 2014, eastern Ukraine was also buzzing with protests against the new authorities in Kiev. This region, with the population close to Russia geographically and culturally, feared that the ultra-right leanings of the newly formed government would bring neo-nationalism to their lands. And they had their reasons. The status of the Russian language in Ukraine has been a stumbling block for many years.
Implementing Russian as a second state language was one of the main campaign promises of President Viktor Yanukovych.
In 2012, the Yanukovych government passed a law making it the second official language in the southern and eastern parts of Ukraine, the areas where the Russian-speaking population makes up a majority. Ukrainian nationalist groups initiated massive protests opposing the law. An observing viewer might see some familiar faces there. On February 23, 2014, the very next day after the regime change, the new government voted for an annulment of the official status of the Russian language. And even though later this decision was vetoed by the acting president, Alexander Turchinov, it still sent a message, and a powerful one. This alarmed the Russian-speaking cities of eastern Ukraine, and people took to the streets to show their disagreement. In response, pro-Maidan groups conducted their own demonstrations. When the two parties would meet, it was always tense, and eventually it led to tragedy. One person died and over 50 people were wounded in clashes during a pro-Russian march protesting the new government in Kiev. On April 6th, the Crimean scenario began repeating in eastern Ukraine, where protesters seized government buildings. And the next day, April 7th, they proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. Kiev replied by announcing the beginning of an anti-terrorist operation in eastern Ukraine. By that time, the international media was screaming about a Russian invasion in Ukraine.
Russia could now be on the verge of invading Ukraine.
But strong words stayed only in the media. The Ukrainian authorities never announced a warlike situation. Why? IMF cannot give money to countries engaged in ongoing war. Petro Poroshenko. Too much money was already invested in Ukraine to stop halfway.
We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine.
На развитие какой демократии тратились эти деньги? Как называли установление демократического режима?
The world seemed too busy welcoming this new democracy in Kiev to notice what was being done as it spread its wings over the country. Many in southern Ukraine had been viewing the revolution with concern.
There is a French documentary that shares what's been happening there and the atrocities.
Тому що у нас робота буде, у них немає. У нас пенсії будуть, у них немає. У нас піклування під дітей, під людей, під пенсіонерів, під дітей буде, у них немає. У нас діти підуть до школи, до дитячих садків. У них вони будуть сидіти в підвалах. Бо вони нічого не вміють робити. І саме так ми виграємо цю війну.
There is the Amnesty International report. It talks about enforced disappearance, secret detention, and torture and other ill treatments of civilians by the Security Service of Ukraine. Here is a BBC documentary made in 2018 about what these groups are.
This video has sent a shiver across Ukraine. The marching young men are far-right nationalists from the Nationalny Drużyny, or national militia. They're at a sacred spot, Ukraine's crucible. Maidan, 4 years on, Ukraine's far right is on the march, and there appears little appetite for stopping it. The national militia are part of a group called Azov. Initially a volunteer military battalion, it has well-established links to the far right. Its founder, this man Andrei Beletsky, has in the past expressed racist and anti-Semitic views. And its logo has clear Nazi overtones.
My favorite quote from Andrei Beletsky is that the destiny of the Ukrainian nation is to be an avant-garde in holy war of white people against underhumans led by Semites.
Beletsky now denies he ever said that, but as this oath-making ceremony shows, he's not running away from the dubious imagery. Azov has now started a political party, as well as launching the national militia. We then go to a place where punters can gamble on computer terminals. We're told it's been operating illegally, as its owners allegedly have links to Russia. It's unspectacular stuff. The national militia call the police out, and reluctantly they appear and go through the motions. What the national militia want us to film is that they're a force for good. This is the national militia when journalists aren't watching.
В масках с молотками, с битами, в куртках с надписью «Национальная дружина». Они кричали «Слава Украине», еще там какие-то свои лозунги. Начали здесь все просто громить.
We're given other footage, which shows more places being trashed, men lighting fireworks indoors, even setting one location on fire. The national militia tell us they're working alongside the police, but they have also, on several occasions, fought them. The national militia have already been flexing their muscles in Ukrainian politics. This is the city hall in the town of Cherkasy. There are more police here today than there are representatives. And the reason the police have come is because at the last session, this happened. The national militia, together with some war veterans, turned up and stood among the deputies, announcing that no one would leave until the mayor's budget was passed. After some scuffles and angry exchanges, the budget was passed.
Для МВД, то такого існувати в Україні не може. Якщо Аваков прийме рішення для себе, що таким чином національна дружина, яка вона є зараз, не може існувати, де люди ходять в балаклавах, де люди ходять у військовій формі, то я думаю, це питання буде рішено.
This is him, Arsen Avakov, Ukraine's ambitious interior minister. His links to the Azov group are well known. He's put their fighters on the payroll of his ministry and appointed one of their commanders, Vadim Troyan, as his deputy.
It's actually no small thing.
The vast majority of those who participated on the Maidan were peaceful protesters. If you had a chance to see the pictures, many of us visited, including many members here. There were mothers and grandmothers and veterans.
Let me note that I have
However,
before you go on, the question is, were there neo-Nazi groups involved in that?
There were, as I said, almost every color of Ukraine was represented, including some ugly colors.
The answer is yes, then.
and targeting civilians.
Да, видели ли вы то, чтобы украинские либо российские военные стреляли своими глазами? Вы видели ли вы что-нибудь?
На гражданский.
В гражданских. В гражданских я видела только вот вариант, когда приехали родственники, которых обстреливали тут же, после того, как они договорились об эвакуации. Понятно? И они только выехали с места, где перед этим попали мины, понятно? Они выехали, они договорились, они пошли, договорились с военными Азовом, который стоял наверху на Комсомольском бульваре возле стадиона, недалеко от завода Азовсталя. Они договорились о том, что надо вывести раненого ребенка, вывести семью, потому что там и дети, да. В итоге они только начали машины двигаться, только уехали с этого места, и в это же место, где они находились, именно пришли украинские, пришли сюда,
Они стреляют.
Они начали стрелять на глазах у них. Понимаете, в чем дело? На глазах у моих родственников они это делали.
Азов стреляет на твою семью.
Да.
И это 100%, это не...
Да, это 100%. Что сеть стреляли.
Почему они сделали это?
Я не знаю, почему. Я не могу понять, почему военные, которые... Потому что они ненавидят нас, я не знаю.
Вы украинский?
Я? У меня мама родилась в Западной Украине, отец в Курске. Я всю жизнь, я родилась в Мариуполе и всю жизнь прожила здесь. У меня все родственники я прекрасно разговариваю и общаюсь и на украинском, и на русском.
A third reason is his awareness of USA's ploy to destroy Russia. Not quite destroy, but, the Wolfowitz Doctrine that I referred to, that unilateralism tenet of the American policy, foreign policy, not allowing any other country to become their rival or to form any coalitions.
As everyone in Beijing knows, and everyone in Moscow knows, the United States was also interested in regime change in China and in Russia. During the unipolar moment, the United States was deeply committed to a global version of the Bush Doctrine. And countries like China, like Russia, and countries in the Middle East greatly resented that because they thought it was a violation of their sovereignty.
So these are, in my view, these are his reasons to go to this. And on top of that, there was a sequence of events that happened during the last year. Among that was a British destroyer that sailed into the Russian waters. Apparently it was an accident. Then there were 2 fighter jets flying very close to the Russian borders in the Black Sea as well as in the Sea of Japan. There were military drones used in the Donbas region. And a naval destroyer in the Sea of Japan as well. So all these little military actions that we're taking, why would you do something like this?
Dumb. So dumb.
Or maybe it was time for the return on investment on those $5 billion that USA invested in Ukraine and their military capabilities. On January the 22nd, recently, there was a shipment of about 90 tons of lethal aid that arrived in Ukraine, including ammunition for first-line defenders. Did they know about this? Was this war so carefully planned and everyone knew but us? I mean, a number of congressmen bought shares in the energy and defense sector. These are legitimate concerns, but I still ask myself whether Putin could have found a different solution. Because first, people's lives are ravaged. Then having to deal with the trauma of it, the psychological trauma that a war brings. All the generations impacted. Third, it was a bad move because it would increase the animosity between people. A sentiment that might last for generations, especially between some segments. Surely not a win-win. And surely not a win for Russia, no matter the outcome. On the other hand, this plays very well into the US US hands. As damaging as it's now, it's gonna help them in destabilizing this region. Fourth, the impact on Russia economically and socially, the way Russians are persecuted and discriminated around the world because of that. In the Western countries where that is almost like encouraged or has been mandated by the governments, which is very much not in line with what a democracy and that supposedly upholds human rights is. It's hypocritical. And fifth, how Russia's role as a player on the world stage will shift. Now that might turn out good in the end, because Russia might strike a better relationship, closer relationship with China, something that the US dreads, and countries like India, and form their relationships and still achieve its aim. Or Russia might have thought, I've got nothing to lose. These people are never gonna recognize me as a great country, and nor are they interested to let me become that country. So they decided rather now than later to act. I'm aware at the same time that Putin's dream and aim is to make Russia great again, if you want to. And that being great again is not being interfered by other countries like the US and morphed into something, whatever the US thinks a democracy is. And also part of it was not having, NATO circle him fully. What are Putin's aims in this, what he calls operation? He wants a so-called denazification of the region. I actually was concerned about this use of the word. What is that supposed to look like? Do you just go and kill certain groups just because they are of certain thinking? But in their definition, it's about reverting back the minority language law. In other words, recognizing Russian as a language that is spoken there and not discriminating based on that. And let me tell you what happens in these countries. When you don't have this kind of law, people, they might refuse to provide the services that they are providing for you if you don't ask in the native language. If you, for example, speak in Russian instead of Ukrainian, they might just refuse to provide a service for you at any level, business level or public services. And that's like a very normal thing. Now imagine that happening in Europe or in America somewhere. As you can imagine, that will not be welcomed at all. So that's one thing. And the second thing in this denazification is to create some laws that stop discrimination based on ethnicity. If you go to look at the Amnesty report, you will see that discrimination in this country is happening at all levels, not just ethnicity. So basically this is one of the goals. Second goal is trying to get recognize the autonomy of these two regions. Frankly, with all the conflict that is happening here, it's almost like everyone would be better off just Russians speaking, living there, and this being such a rub in the face of the Ukrainian Nazis, nationalists. So why do you care? Why perpetuate it? And of course, no NATO. A very clear pushback to the West. So I think this is one of the main things that he's aiming at. Because of the propaganda, there are a lot of things that are said about him, that he wants to occupy Ukraine and take it as part of Russia. That is something that I don't see that that's even possible. Many agree that Putin is not so stupid as to do that. John Mearsheimer said it would be like swallowing a porcupine, and I agree. Putin wouldn't want that porcupine in his belly, in the Russia belly. Let the porcupine stay there because of all the conflicts that are there and everything, and that would not look well. So does he want to influence it? Of course. Does US want to have a say in Mexico or any neighboring countries? Of course, every country wants to have a sort of a relationship with their neighbors.
Well, does he see this historically? Does he see these two countries coming together again?
Я думаю, что это неизбежно, во всяком случае, неизбежно строительство нормальных, дружеских, я бы даже сказал, более чем дружеских, союзнических отношений. И в конечном итоге все-таки мы придем к состоянию, о котором я сказал. Сближение неизбежно.
Here's the thing with this NATO hanging, you know, I wonder if he pushed for more influence over who is in power in Ukraine, just so that the NATO is avoided. So if NATO was off the table, it wasn't an issue. I wonder if Putin would have built differently the relationship with Ukraine. That Putin wants to annex generally all these other countries and recreate the Soviet Union again. I will tell you that there are people that voice these extreme ideas in around Russian politics, but these are quite extreme and nobody really takes them seriously. And honestly, I don't believe that Putin wants to do that. That Putin is like Hitler, that is another thing. You know, I haven't studied Hitler, but I know someone who studied that, and here is what he had to say.
Conventional wisdom is that Putin is the main cause of the crisis. Some say he's either crazy or irrational. Angela Merkel was making this argument for a while. He's bent on creating a greater Russia, and he bears marked resemblance to Adolf Hitler. Say a few words about each of these. I know a great deal about Adolf Hitler. I've written and I teach extensively on Nazi Germany's behavior in the 30s and during World War II. The idea that he bears any resemblance to Adolf Hitler is laughable in the extreme. It's hard to believe that serious people make that argument.
There is a great tendency to demonize Putin because of his actions. And I thought a lot about this, you know, while I don't agree with any of these interventions in a time like 21st century where I truly believe things can be achieved differently and there could be a balance in the world. I find it very interesting the fact that Putin is demonized and vilified. You know what that achieves? As I thought about it, the more you vilify and demonize someone, the easier for you is to go and target and kill them. Just like if you tell the soldiers that their enemies are these monsters that need to be killed, that there is no other way to get rid of them, then they will have this incentive. They will not see another human being. They will just go for the kill. And the same with Putin. And also, the more you target Putin as the only one responsible and the horrible man that started all this, the more you distract the public's attention from USA and its role in it, and also the amazing money making that is happening as a result. Now, what is this thing happening? Why is this trend, why is this aim at getting rid of Putin in the West? Why are they so concerned about Russia becoming a greater country? And they seem to be obsessed about it. They seem to be obsessed since the end of the Soviet Union. They never stopped to have that obsession. Should they really fear that? I've watched an interview on the Valuetainment channel on YouTube run by Patrick Ben-David with a former KGB spy who turned into a CIA spy. Basically, he started working for the US. His name is Jack Barsky. There, finally, I get somebody from the inside, from both sides, to reveal what's actually happening there, the extent to which Russia is involved and what the damage that is doing and how it justifies that the US should go after it and squish it and all that. You listen to that, you just realize, oh my gosh, there is pretty much nothing of Russia's making that is going wrong in the US. Anything that they have to complain of, it's not Russia to point the finger at. At the end of the interview, which is, by the way, fascinating, you should listen to it, he's asked, Who are the three enemies that you'd have to look out for if you're advising the President of America? And here's what he said. China, absolutely China, number one. Number two, ourselves, referring to the American people and everything they created inwardly, a lot referring to the Marxist influence of the left and the mayhem that is creating in the country and weakening it in all possible ways. And then third, he said, pick one. Is it going to be Russia? Is it going to be Iran? Is it going to be North Korea? Basically, is in his estimation, Russia is not even top priority. If that is true, what a misallocation of resources and energy on the US government part.
For the United States, there is one serious threat in the world today, and it's China. It is not Russia. The United States should be focusing laser-like on China. It should be working overtime to think about how to contain China. And at the same time, it should be working with Russia as an ally to help contain China. India, Russia, the United States should all be on the same side of the ledger, all bent on containing China, because China has the potential to be a remarkably powerful country. Instead, what the United States has foolishly done is it has picked a fight with Russia. It is bogged down in Eastern Europe. It has done remarkably little in Asia, especially in East Asia, to explain to its allies how it plans to contain China, because it's too busy thinking about how to fight the Russians. And we shouldn't be fighting the Russians. We should be working to have some sort of alliance with the Russians, again, all for the purposes of containing China.
The bottom line is this. USA and Russia have different perspectives when it comes to their place in this world. USA says, I want to be the only great country, and has this unilateralist worldview. Russia says, I want it to be balanced, and I want to be recognized for my great place. So I'm wondering, what if all these big ones, such as Russia and China and USA, could cohabitate together in a balanced coexistence, recognizing each other as potential equals? I can see the Americans falling off the chair. What would you vouch for? What if at the 2007 Munich Security Council, instead of rejoicing over the unity against Putin's expressing concerns about NATO expansion and boasting that he didn't draw a wedge between them, what if instead of that, they would have taken his concerns seriously? Maybe he's got a point. Maybe it's a good idea to leave some neutral space between NATO and Russia. Let's be good neighbors. Let's respect each other in this way. How do you think this could play out? Do you think maybe this wouldn't have happened now? What if they cared to know him?
I think one of the most unfortunate things that has happened has been the personal demonization of Vladimir Putin. And in that regard, our present president, from the time when he was the senior Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and voted for NATO expansion, later continued to keep Jackson Vanik in force long after Russia was no longer subject to it. And in 2008, when he started running for president, he said he would stand up to Vladimir Putin. I really don't know what Vladimir Putin had done to him or to the United States at that point. So, and then, of course, particularly in the second half of the Obama administration, where everything is being explained as a reaction to Vladimir Putin, we're going to cost him for what he's doing, etc. I think this is very dangerous. And going back to my experience in in the Reagan and the first Bush administrations, one of the basic points in our strategy to end the Cold War was to start dealing with the Russian leaders as individuals, pay attention to where they're coming from. Ronald Reagan spent much more time trying to understand Gorbachev and where he was coming from than he did studying, throw weights and warheads and the technical aspects of arms control. We have talked a lot about NATO expansion, but it's not just that. Although, of course, assigning American forces to Ukraine, as we've been doing, certainly crossed a red line that anybody would understand. But it was much more than that. Remember that beginning with George W. Bush, we began to pull out of almost every arms control agreement we had. We pulled out of the ABM Treaty, which had been the basis of it. We pulled out later of this of the INF Treaty. We pulled out of open science, which had been an American proposal ever since the Eisenhower administration. And at the same time, we were injecting ourselves directly into Russian politics, and as far as Russia was concerned, even worse, in the politics, the domestic politics of the other ex-Soviet republics. So it seems to me that there was an absolute almost effort to denigrate and to insult. First Putin, and then in many cases, the Russian people as a whole. I mean, I was astounded when President Obama was saying something, Russia makes nothing that anybody wants. At that time, the only way we could get to the International Space Station was with Russian rockets. And we were trying our best to keep Iran and Turkey from buying Russian anti-aircraft things. I mean, how can an educated, decent person, as I'm sure Obama is, make statements like that? Well, anyway, I think we have reached a situation which is extraordinarily dangerous. And I'm not sure we are handling it as responsibly as Kennedy and Khrushchev handled it back when I was a junior officer in the American Embassy in Moscow and translated some of Khrushchev's messages to Kennedy.
It seems to me that there might have been a way to work with Putin in a very different manner so that we would have never ended up where we are today.
I live in a country that's committing economic suicide. I mean, that's literally what's happening right now. And they're doing it because of the most narrow-minded policy posture imaginable, this Russophobic demonization of an entire nation in the personality of one man, Vladimir Putin. We've turned him into a cartoon figure bad guy. All the people that sit there and speak down, they don't even know the guy. If you actually took, I mean, the interesting thing about Putin is he's been around for 5 American presidents. And I make this following challenge. Take the inaugural address or any State of the Union address of any president, because those are the premier speech, written speeches. Those are the ones, those are the big dollar speeches, the ones that are supposed to have the lines that we remember forever. Take any one of those and compare it to your average Vladimir Putin speech, given off the cuff, no script, just speaking. Go to the Valdai conferences that he holds in Sochi and listen to this man talk. He is articulate, he is intelligent, he has facts at his fingertips, he's witty, he's humorous. This guy is literally one of the most intelligent politicians in the world. That doesn't mean that I worship the man. It doesn't mean that I think that, his breath doesn't stink or whatever. I know he puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. All I'm saying is, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, you have to respect the fact that this guy is good at what he does. And so when I watch these amateur TV analysts sit there and turn him into a cartoon figure, all I'm thinking is you guys are slitting your own throat, because if you don't know your enemy is going to crush you. And if you're viewing Vladimir Putin as a problem, you have to define the problem accurately before you can come up with a solution. Because if you're trying to solve a problem without accurately defining what it is, you're solving nothing. And that's what's going on right now. America is implementing policy after policy after policy that is solving nothing because we haven't defined the problem properly.
In a way, Putin has been made a little bit like King Kong. So far, from all the interviews that I've heard about Putin, I sense that he is actually quite open to collaborate and to work with other countries and any president. And it's a matter of how much the other countries are interested to work with him. But if the goal is to overthrow him, if the goal is to see him and portray him as a criminal and not see behind that, then of course that will never happen. One very curious thing for me to learn was that Putin actually opposes communism, and he believes that the Soviet Union made a great mistake in isolating and pulling so much to a side, which led to this polarization between the West and the East. So this is what I've concluded about Putin. Perhaps this could have been solved in a different way. But given his vision for the country, given his understanding of the current situation, his understanding of the West's motives towards Russia, he chose this course of action. Many agree that this was avoidable. And my hope, my prayer, is that a compromise would be found.
If you look at what happened to Ukraine in the 21st century, there is a feeling of déjà vu. It's as if we are a part of the well-known legend about the Pied Piper who led the charmed children to go nowhere. Millions of people were deluded by the sweet promises of rapid prosperity with the help of the United States and Western Europe. Very little time passed after the so-called Revolution of Dignity, and all expectations have collapsed. Instead of prosperity, there is the collapse of the economy, mass exodus of people from the country, and the death of now thousands of people. And the most important thing, Ukraine is in confrontation with Russia. The function that its real owners left for Ukraine works flawlessly.
Anybody who actually looks at the facts of the Ukraine coup in 2013 and 2014 can see how the U.S. was directly involved. But it wasn't just an end in itself. It was a means to an end. And the end that they were going for is a way to antagonize Russia. They've stirred up aggression against Russia right at Russia's border and then blamed Russia for anything that happened.
But it's always interesting. Do puppeteers understand that sometimes puppets begin to live their own lives? The fact of Ukraine's interference in the elections in the United States is the first wake-up call. And then, war between Ukraine and Russia. Yesterday it was unthinkable. Today it is a probable scenario. It doesn't matter who starts first. It is important to note that the shockwave from the first explosion has spread too wide and affects those who prefer to wait out on the side. Does the Pied Piper who leads those who believe him further and further to nowhere understand that Russia will never accept a hostile state near its borders? No one wants a full-scale war. For those who are still in control in Kiev, the only way to avoid defeat and destruction is to organize a provocation. The armies of Russia and NATO will come into military conflict. This will be the beginning of a withering Armageddon. Only scorched earth will remain in place of Ukraine. the world will be engulfed in a giant flame. Probably the last war for humanity. Just because someone in Kiev really wants to remain in power. So nothing good will happen. The new president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, won because he promised to stop the war in Donbas. One order of the commander-in-chief is enough for the war to be ended, and thousands of human lives could be saved. No one can prevent him from giving such an order. But the days go by, and there is still no peace. The hopes of Ukrainians for the new course are fading with each passing day.
І наше найперше завдання – припинення вогню на Донбасі.
We understand the Russian side. We understand one of their provisions that is always talked about is to recognize Crimea as Russian territory. I will definitely not recognize that. And they would really like to take the southern parts of our country. I clearly understand that questions like this will be raised in negotiations, if there ever are any. But we were not ready to give up our territory from the beginning. Had we been willing to give up our territory, there would have been no war.
Poking a stick in the Russians' eye is a prescription for disaster. So a neutral Ukraine is the solution, and it's been the solution all along. But I don't see how you get a neutral Ukraine at this point in time, because a neutral Ukraine would be a victory for Russia. It would be a victory for Ukraine too. But the problem is it would make the Americans and their European allies very unhappy, because Ukraine would then not be in NATO. And furthermore, inside of Ukraine itself, it would make the far right very unhappy. This is why Zelensky has remarkably little maneuver room, because on his right are a large number of Ukrainians who don't want him to make any concessions to the Russians. And those far-right elements in Ukraine, coupled with America's unwillingness to see Russia win in any way, means that Ukraine itself is unlikely to be able to push for neutral country.
Attention, Zeds! Come back! That's an order!
Why, oh why did Zed zap his Zeds? We have to get them back!
Agreed.